بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ثم أما بعد proceed. Inshallah, we'll go over, some a few introductory points before we actually get into the subject that we will be studying. So the purpose of this on-site function for Mishkah is basically to it's like community outreach. If someone wants to study with Mishkah, then they can use this towards credit they get from Mishkah. If someone does not want to carry on with Mishkah studies, then it would be beneficial to finish 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 courses, because we will be going over several subjects, inshallah, one after the other. It is not to the point where we could be, claim to be like an on-site campus or college, but some on-site function here and there would be helpful for the predominantly online students. So basically, with inshallah, over time, hopefully inshallah, this will attract more people. But it is not the number of people as much as it is the consistency that would be helpful for like a function like this, because you want to see that these are not regular public lectures where you could come one day and listen to a lecture about Tawbah, and then the next day they'll be talking about Muraqabah, they'll be talking about wudu, they'll be talking about halal meat or something like that, and it doesn't really matter much if you attend one and miss one, and certainly everybody will be missing some, but at least to have a core group of people that will be consistent and not miss or basically attend most of these lectures will be quite helpful, because that's what it is all about: structured, organized, consistent studying of the Sharia sciences. I usually have the Arabic and English across from each other. Wherever I teach, I try to make sure that there is enough engagement of Arabic, because some of the terminology will really need to be remembered in Arabic. It's important that some of this is remembered in Arabic. And I find that the knowledge seekers or Tulabul Ilm, wherever they are at in their Arabic, proficiency, it is helpful for them to get like a dosage of Arabic. On that wide spectrum of Arabic proficiency from 0 to 100%. 100% is probably not, present in our times. That's Sibawayh and Asma'i and so on. But on that spectrum, anyway, from 0 to whatever is present of proficiency in our times, there will always be a benefit for having the Arabic, because the familiarization with the Arabic terminology is quite helpful for the students of knowledge. That's why you will always find the Arabic across from the English. And inshallah, the same we will do when we go over legal maxims and so on. The other thing is, if you have already attended some of these with Mishkah, it will not, inshallah, you will not find it to be like redundant repetition, because these are not meant for basically timely or quick accomplishment. This is meant for taking our time in studying and covering every point in sufficient detail. It will not be your routine sort of college course, because even in Islamic studies, college courses, people usually don't go into sufficient detail in college, because because of the time constraints and because they have, you know, a timeline that they need to respect and so on. So if you attend some of these online, or you have attended some of these online, inshallah you will not find it redundant to listen to it one more time. It's never redundant because basically you need to study. It's never redundant because basically you do need to study the subject over and over and over again to get it down. It may take, you know, we said that before, as far as reading a particular book, it could take you like 40 times to actually get it down. Get it down in the sense of being able to, you know, teach it. So when, inshallah, there is no redundancy in repetition per se, just repetition per se. But particularly here, it will not be redundant to have attended these online because we will cover them in a greater detail. Also, we would not be, you know, be rushed by any timelines. We'll just go over the course and then do the subject justice and not worry much about when we will finish it. Because some of these subjects do actually need a lot of deliberation, and some of the issue with when are we going to finish is an issue also of modern times, because people need to move on to the next and if you remember, Abu Hanifa did not sit down to teach until he was 40 years old, although he was ready at age 18 or 20, because he felt that there is so much to learn still from Hamad. So that's Hamad ibn Salama, Hamad ibn Dirham. He had two teachers, Hamad ibn Dirham and Hamad ibn Dinar. Hamad ibn Dirham is the faqih one, Hamad ibn Dinar is the muhaddith one, out of those two teachers. But Hamad ibn Dirham, which is the faqih one of the teachers of Abu Hanifa, were the more prominent, like, you know, none of them did not know about the, you know, hadith or fiqh, but more inclined towards fiqh, more inclined towards hadith. So he felt that there isn't much more to learn, so for 20 more years, he continued to take the role of a student versus a teacher, even though he was quite ready. But nowadays we want to finish in like 4 years and then we move on to the next step. So sometimes we're in too much of a hurry or a rush to finish, which deprives us of the required deliberation and, you know, ta'anni in seeking knowledge. Okay, so you may think that it is like very costly time-wise to get credit for the on-site functions, because, you know, one on-site course could be 3 times or 4 times as much work as the online course. And you still get the same credit. If it's 2 credit hours, you get 2 credit hours, 3 credit hours, you get 3 credit hours. But this is not how the student of knowledge measures, you know, the value of learning anyway. It's not by the amount of credit hours. It's about the benefit. The other thing why we wanted to have those, you know, we have this series of lectures, or we have this on-site contact between the teachers, and not only myself and students here in New Jersey, but this is a model that we're trying to see if we can implement across the board for Mishka. Whenever we have, you know, qualified instructors, Mishka instructors in one place, we wanted to establish some degree of contact between the students in that locality and the teacher, so that there is this in-person contact, which is helpful, because the asl في تلقي العلوم المشافهة, the default in acquiring knowledge is by, you know, in-person contact and direct learning from the teacher. And the online teaching is the second best, and we try to make it as close to the best as possible by making it as interactive and live as possible. But it continues to be the second best. So we want also to provide Mishka students, particularly in North America, this is where most of our teachers reside, the opportunity to benefit from the best mode of education, which is the in-person direct learning. So in this sense, we will not be limited to the subjects that we the primary subjects that we address, but we will also, there will be also a chance for the students, particularly in discussion sessions, to ask about any topics they may be concurrently studying with Mishka, or just studying, period. So if there will be a chance, inshallah, after the lecture to, for like, what we may call tutoring, or, addressing the questions of the students regarding any other subject. We wanted to start by Tarikh al-Tashriya because it is academic enough and, entertaining enough to be the start. Because if we start by something like legal maxims, it's quite a heavy subject and quite dry. To many people it will be dry. It's not really dry. After you start to enjoy fiqh, you find like a subject like legal maxims. It is extremely entertaining, like stimulating, interesting, exciting. But it will require a little bit of time, and will require a little bit of familiarity with fiqh to feel this way about a subject like legal maxims or qawa'id al-fiqhiyya. So Tarikh al-Tashriya is this crossover between very academic, this is not Tarikh al-Khulafa al-Rashidin, history of the rightly guided Khalifas, and this is not fiqh al-Sirah. So it is not your regular subject that may be taught in the masajid, and at the same time it is not legal maxims. So it was like a nice crossover between the two. And as a start, it would be a good start. Also, familiarity with Tarikh al-Tashriya, the history of legislation, is very, very helpful for the student of knowledge. This is basically like drawing out the roadmap for, where things came from and how things ended up being the way they are now, how different sciences evolved to the way they are now. Because from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was not even that classification of aqidah and fiqh and raqa'iq and, mustalah and usul. So how did all of this evolve, and how did it reach the level of maturity that it is at now is quite helpful for the students of fiqh, for the students of knowledge in general. And sometimes also it protects you from blunders that are not appropriate of the student of knowledge. Such as, I use this example quite often because ever since I heard it, I was quite, amused by it. When someone says, how come Abu Hanifa did not read this in al-Bukhari, for instance? So that statement shows that the person does not know much about, Abu Hanifa or Bukhari, it's just because we'll come to know that Abu Hanifa died the year 150 after Hijrah. Bukhari was born in 192 after Hijrah. So Abu Hanifa died 42 years before Bukhari was born. And not really knowing this would cause the person to be, the question itself, how come Abu Hanifa did not read this in Bukhari, is a manifestation of a bigger problem. Because if that person would not know why there are differences, why there is the disagreement, would not know the difference between fiqh and hadith, would not know so many things that will be essential, you know, for the good understanding or the good comprehension of knowledge in general. Okay. So we will go now over the introduction, and then we will address the first part of the history of legislation. This introduction is like a generic introduction, but it's nice to just go over it. This is the statement from Sheikh Salah al-Sawi. We include it at the beginning of every book, and it says here, مرحبا بطالب العلم كلمة قالها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم منذ 14 قرنا من الزمان. Welcome, knowledge seekers. This was a statement said by the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam 14 centuries ago. Well, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this to Safwan ibn Assal al-Muradi. Safwan ibn Assal al-Muradi. He came to ask the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam 2 questions, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him, Marhaban bi talib al-ilm. Welcome, O seeker of knowledge. For knowledge seeker. And the Prophet ﷺ recommended to the Sahaba and exhorted the Sahaba and enjoined the Sahaba to do the same thing. He told them that there will come to you people seeking knowledge, فَإِن جَاءُوكُمْ فَأَغْنُوهُمْ وَأَقْنُوهُمْ وَعَلِّمُوهُمْ. And if they come to you, then أغنوهم, make them self-sufficient, or sustain them. In other words, sustain them so that they could actually devote themselves to the seeking of knowledge. Aqnuhum is like more than agnuhum, because ghina is when you have sufficiency. Aqnuhum is when you have qunya. Qunya is savings, assets. Qunya is assets or savings. So aqnuhum and teach them, so make them sufficient, sustain them, provide for them, support them and teach them. So that would be the responsibility of, Mushka is not doing this, certainly, because Mushka is looking for someone to yubniha or yubniha. But this would be like Muslim countries would need to do this work, and in a community like our community, you need to have sufficient endowments for this work to be done. Because honestly speaking, Muslim countries, when they look at the U.S. community, they say, well, why would we be giving money to those rich people? They actually should be giving money to Muslims in less fortunate countries, there was some funding of some dawah programs 20, 30 years ago and 50 years ago, and this will continue to diminish more and more, because people would say that this is an established community, 6 million or 8 million people that are supposedly, rich enough. The Muslim community in the U.S. is considered to be rich enough. The average income for the Muslim family in the U.S. is a little bit higher than your mainstream average. So it's an affluent community, and then a community like this should not expect all the time, because every time when we talk about funding or we talk about anything like this, then people start to think of the Gulf and how can we get some money from the Gulf, and it's really pathetic because people in the Gulf are not really richer than the U.S. Muslim community here of 8 million people, and there's some countries in the Gulf that are much smaller than this. So 8 million people in the U.S. would be able to do much. So endowments should be the way, should encourage the whenever, don't underestimate your worth, your value, your effect, impact. Just bring up those issues whenever you talk with, friends, acquaintances, leaders, Muslim public leaders, etc. The issue of endowments is extremely important for the survival of our U.S. Islamic institutions in general, and people should pay attention to this and should do better in this regard. And I don't want to even go there and start to compare ourselves to like Catholics or Christians of other denominations, the amount of endowments they have. If we start to start now to build hospitals, it may take us like 300 years to catch up with the Catholics, for instance, or more, if we work hard on it. So, but marhaban bi talib al-ilm, welcoming the student of knowledge and facilitating the path for the students of knowledge is something the Prophet ﷺ was keen on. He said that to Safwan ibn Hassan al-Muradi when he came to ask him for knowledge. Marhaban bi talib al-ilm. This was reported by Tabarani authentically. Then, so he says this was a statement said by the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in 14 centuries ago, but has since been inscribed in the hearts of his heirs. The waratha, the heirs, the waratha of the Messenger of Allah are the scholars. Waratha of the Messenger of Allah are the scholars. And it has really been inscribed in the hearts of the heirs of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you find Abu Hanifa, for instance, looking after his students. He had the ability to do so. He was a merchant. He used to sell silk, and he would spend on his students, particularly someone like Abu Yusuf. He was an orphan, and Abu Hanifa would give him money and would support him so that he could come and learn and devote himself to the path of knowledge. And bear with his frequent questions that he had. Abu Hanifa himself had frequent questions for Hamad, and some people used to frown at Abu Hanifa because he asked Hamad too many questions, and then Hamad would tell them that he's a brilliant student and that he will have a great future as a scholar. So he would tolerate all the questions and answer him with deliberation. So that is something important that we need to do, because each one of you will act sometimes in the capacity of a student, sometimes in the capacity of a teacher or a da'i. Sometimes you will receive and sometimes you will send. So whenever you're receiving, the etiquettes of the student of knowledge should be emphasized, and whenever you're taking the other position, the etiquette of the teacher, you should also abide by them. So merciful teachers that are concerned, interested in the welfare, well-being of their students and their good comprehension of the subject, and so on. With this blessed statement of the Prophet's heirs, scholars receive the students of knowledge from all corners of the globe, accommodate them into their gatherings, and value their dedication in acquiring the sacred sciences. Then he said, Sharia sciences, dear students, are the prophetic heritage. The prophets did not bequeath dirhams or dinars, but they did bequeath knowledge. Whatever portion of that an individual learns, this is their share of the prophetic inheritance. For this reason, seeking knowledge is the loftiest quest that our lives and efforts can be invested in. Every moment wherein the individual did not gain knowledge or pursue a good deed will inevitably be a moment that results in lengthy regrets. taken its first steps to disseminate knowledge throughout the world for the sake of Allah and according to the Sunnah of His Prophet ﷺ. Mishka University is making North America its launching platform. By that, Mishka is following in the footsteps of the Prophet's companions who left to Medina to communicate the prophetic message and traditions to people. So if you look at the number of Sahaba that were buried in Baqiyah, it's less than 1/10 of the number of Sahaba that attended with the Prophet ﷺ Hajjat al-Wada'. Where is the rest of the Sahaba? They have been buried throughout the lands, because they first fought for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala against the Persians and Romans, and then they settled wherever they went, and did not go back to Medina, even though it was the capital, it was home to them, it was the capital. Someone like Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, the story of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari is just an amazing story. Because Abu Ayyub died at the borders of Constantinople at the age of about 85 years. So he continued until 85. Abu Ayyub al-Ansari was the first host of the Prophet ﷺ when he came to Medina. The Prophet was Abu Ayyub al-Ansari's guest until he built his own home. And so Abu Ayyub al-Ansari's home would have been a museum, sort of like people would have flocked to him from all corners of the globe to just see him, the first host of the Prophet ﷺ, and see the house where the Prophet ﷺ lived and so on. But this is not a life that they consider to be graceful or honorable, where you sit down and then a lot of people come to you and then this life of celebrity, fame, recognition is not. But he died as a soldier in the army of Yazid ibn Muawiyah, like a young man at the time. And he died as a soldier in this army, fighting at the doorsteps of Constantinople. So this is the tradition of the Sahaba radhiyallahu anhum. They did not prefer a life of luxury and fame and life of lassitude and lethargy. They were always active, spreading the message throughout the world. And so they follow the traditions of the companions, spreading the message, and established traders for it in the east and west, preferring that over remaining in Medina near the Prophet's holy mosque, where Salah is 1,000 times more rewarding than in any other mosque. They understood it's not only the fame and celebrity, but also the virtue of the Medina, the virtue of the Salah in Medina. They understood that the virtue of disseminating Islam is greater than the virtue of staying around in Medina and attending the Masjid of the Prophet ﷺ and earning the multiplied reward of the Salah in the Masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. As students of knowledge, at the very onset of this endeavor, we advise you to only intend the pleasure of Allah, the Almighty and Majestic, and not spoil your noble quest with lowly interests. Remember that he who learns a sacred science for worldly gains will never smell the fragrance of paradise in the hereafter, as the Prophet ﷺ said. It should suffice you that the noble hadith says, verily actions are but by intentions, and for every man is but what or which he intends. So this is the only knowledge that knowing it, learning it, will be a loss unless the intentions were pure. There is no other knowledge. If you learn anything or not learn it, you learn medicine, you could, use it, make some money off of it. Your intention does not really matter much in this regard. But this, so if you learn it for the sake of Allah, it is good. You'll get the reward in the hereafter in this life. If you learn it just to make money, you'll still make money, and it's not really worthy of punishment to learn it for the sake of money. It's, you learn anything, any profession. To learn something for the sake of money is, you didn't get punished for this. Except for these sciences, the sciences of Sharia. If you learn them for a cause other than the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, other than the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you would have been much better off not learning them. The primary method of learning Islamic sciences is direct face-to-face instruction. Over the centuries, scholars have learned via this method, and it should not be undermined whenever possible. It is said that one who makes the book his or her sheikh teacher is bound to be mistaken more often than not. The phrase for this in Arabic is من كان شيخه كتابه أو من كان شيخه كتابه غلب خطأه صوابا أو فاق خطأه صوابا. So من كان شيخه كتابه فاق خطأه صوابا. And this is a phrase that is commonly used by the scholars. And some of the scholars may misuse this statement, because at the end of the day you will need to read on your own. But if you don't have any sheikh, then you may get to, you may arrive at very wrong conclusions from your reading. You do need some input from a sheikh, but it does not mean that everything you will need someone to teach it to you. Like, you will not be able to read any book without a teacher, particularly if the book is self-explanatory or the book is basically a commentary that explains what it addresses in sufficient detail. In this case, reading without a teacher will not cause you to be more mistaken than often. So this statement itself is not a hadith, it is a scholarly statement, and with scholarly statements you need to be moderate in understanding them, because the scholars, unlike the Prophet ﷺ, even the statements of the Prophet ﷺ, you need to understand them within the context of the rest of the statements of the Prophet ﷺ in the Quran and so on. But the Prophet's statements have this, unique characteristic of being very well balanced in and of themselves, because he was given Jawama al-Kalim, most comprehensive speech, comprehensive and brief at the same time. But for the scholars, they may want to point out a certain angle of an issue, so the statement may end up being a little bit lopsided, because it could be pointing out a certain important aspect, but at the same time it could be misread. And many of the people who say that there are two different types of knowledge actually use this statement to justify their ilm ladunni type thing. That there is this ilm that you guys read in books, and there is this ilm that you get through chains of teachers, one teacher after another. So if you tell them that this is a hadith that is in Sahih Muslim, and it means such and such, and now we explained it to mean such and such, and so on, they will tell you this is the ilm that you read in books. But I have the ilm that you get through chains of teachers that end with, the Prophet ﷺ or Jibreel or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that very statement has to be understood with moderation. You do need teachers. But the knowledge in books is not all in need of deciphering, because some of that is basically self-explanatory. Therefore, be keen in maintaining strong ties with your teachers, wherever they are, and regardless of the physical distance between you and them, and seize every opportunity to benefit from them. Excel in your studies and take full advantage of the activities and tests at the end of each year. We wish you success and pray that Allah keeps you firm on His path, for indeed it's only His reward that's worthy of being sought, and only His guidance that leads to the straight path. So this is the introductory statement of Shaykh Salah Sawi, Hafizahullah, may Allah preserve him. Introduction to the history of legislation. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala mabuthi rahmatan lil alameen, Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi, wa man da'a bida'watihi ila yawm ad-din. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and may His peace and blessings be upon the one sent as a mercy to the worlds, His Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and upon His family, companions, and those who invite to His call until the day of judgment. Although it's uncontested among researchers in various disciplines that the history of each science does not constitute anything more than an introduction to it, learning the history of a science is essential for its mastery. It allows the student to transcend beyond the superficial understanding of it and towards becoming one of its positive contributors. To the extent that the student grasps the history of his respective discipline, will be his love for it and his dedication towards it, towards its advancement, and the opposite of that will cause the opposite. So history, to learn the history of legislation, because here, in this particular course, we will not be talking about legislation. We'll be talking about the history of legislation. So these are the benefits of learning the history of legislation. Although it is just an introduction to the legislation itself, but it is quite an essential introduction for the mastery of the knowledge of the Sharia, the knowledge of legislation, to know how it evolved, and to know how it reached the state in which it is now from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where there were, where such disciplines did not even have titles. Or most of these disciplines did not even have agreed upon titles. So it's an important introduction, and we said in order for you to really have like a bird's view of any science and have like a good understanding of the science, before you walk into it, you need to figure out 10 things. You remember them? إن مبادئ كل علم 10 الحد والموضوع ثم الثمرة نسبته وفضله والواضع الاسم الاستمداد حكم الشارع مسائل والبعض بالبعض اكتفى ومن دار الجميع حاز الشرف. إن مبادئ كل علم 10. So the principles, introductory principles or introductory points to every knowledge are 10. الحد والموضوع ثم الثمرة. Al-Hadd is the definition, al-Mawdu' is the subject matter, al-Thamara is the benefit of learning this knowledge, the fruit. Thamara is fruit, the benefit of learning this knowledge. Al-Hadd wal-Mawdu' thumma al-Thamara. Nisbatuhu, which is the relevance of this to other sciences, the relevance of this discipline to other disciplines. Wafadluhu, its virtue, wal-Wada, the founder, al-Ismu, its name, and what it means. What is Istimdadu, where it comes from, its sources. Hukm al-Shara, the ruling of the legislator concerning the learning of this science. Masail, its topics. وَالْبَعْضُ بِالْبَعْضِ اكْتَفَى, and some are satisfied with only knowing some of them. وَمَنْ دَرَ الْجَمِيعَ حَازَ الشَّرَفَ, and whoever knows all of them will attain nobility and knowledge. So these are the introductory steps to learning the various disciplines of Sharia. You want to know fiqh, you want to know what fiqh means, you want to know the sources, where it is deduced from, you want to know the founder, you want to know founder in this case would be, no, that's usul al-fiqh. No, fiqh, no. Who's the founder? No, actually, fiqh, the founder is Allah, the legislator. Because fiqh is not something that you could attribute to like a beginning at one point as a discipline. It was there from the time of the Prophet ﷺ. You know, usul al-fiqh, terminology of hadith, these are sciences that you could attribute to one founder, not in the sense that he really founded it from scratch, from nothing. It is in the sense of compiled it, collected it, you know, first author. So when we say Shafi'i is the founder of usul al-fiqh, it does not mean that the Sahaba had no, you know, concept of usul al-fiqh. It just means that it means that he is the first one to put together a book on this discipline, devoted to this discipline, which is his book, Al-Risala. Risala means the message. And that is when Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi asked him to write a book on usul al-fiqh, because what happened is, you know, the scholars of Iraq, the scholars, Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi was from the scholars of Iraq. He was, you know, one of the students of Sufyan al-Thawri. So he was one of the scholars of Iraq, but he had asked Shafi'i to put together a book on usul al-fiqh so that Ahl al-Hadith, the more inclined to Hadith, scholars more inclined to Hadith, can answer Ahl al-Ra'i, the people who are more inclined to reasoning, with legitimate answers. It is to arm Ahl al-Hadith in their debates with Ahl al-Ra'i. So Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi asked Shafi'i to put together that book, so he put it together. And that's why he was called the founder. Not that he founded the concept itself, but he is the first author. But you can't say this with fiqh. So Islamic fiqh or علم الفقه الإسلامي من العلوم الشرعية العظيمة القدر الشريفة المنزلة. Islamic fiqh, jurisprudence, is one of the great, most noble Islamic sciences, just like other sciences. It is equally important to know about its history, namely its origin, compilation, phases of development, notable authorities, and how it has reached us. In fact, the necessity for studying the history of Islamic fiqh in particular surpasses that of the other sciences. So history of legislation and history of fiqh in particular is more important to your good understanding of fiqh than the history of other sciences to your understanding of other sciences.
I'm sorry, can you go back to the 10 things?
To the previous page?
The 10 things.
The 10 things that you mentioned.
Oh, the 10 things. And by the way, a copy of this, a PDF copy of this, will go to Abu Sumayya, and he can, it is important that you give him your emails, or if he doesn't have them, so that he can send out the PDF copy. And whenever we mention something like this, I will also send a copy of it. But so the 10 principles, I will send like a separate copy on the 10 principles. So the 10 principles would be الحد إن بدأ كل علم 10 الحد والموضوع ثم الثمرة. الحد, the definition. الموضوع, the subject matter. الثمرة, the fruit or benefit of studying this knowledge. نسبته, the relevance to other sciences. وفضله, its virtue. والوضع, its founder. الاسم, its name. والاستمداد, its sources. حكم الشارع is the ruling of the legislator concerning learning this science. Masail is the topics. And you will get all of this, inshallah. Yeah. So this particular, this particular necessity becomes manifest upon noticing that many ardent followers of Islam nowadays are busily engaged with refuting the allegations of the bigoted opponents of Islam who falsely accuse the religion of rigidity and of being incompatible with the modern age that's distinguished in its fast pace and brilliant scientific breakthroughs in every field. Since its very conception until today, Islamic fiqh has passed through many phases between maturation, strength, flourishing, brilliance, relevancy, and at times it went through states beneath that. All human sciences through history experienced this, for this is the way upon which Allah disposed of His creation, and you will not find in the way of Allah any alteration. What is He trying to say here? He's trying to say that even if we do have a phase of stagnation at this time, why are we having some stagnation at this time? And this is a question that is quite sensitive, controversial, heatedly debated. Are we having stagnation in fact? Are we having irrelevancy to some extent? Stagnation, is fiqh still able to be compatible with the modern age, or do we need to do more work for fiqh to be compatible with the modern age? Certainly there are shortcomings. The shortcomings are attributed to us, not to the fiqh itself, not to the ability of fiqh to be compatible. But any nation that goes through times of flourishing and times of stagnation and weakness, that will not only affect the armies, it will not affect their military power, will not affect their scientific advancement. It will affect all sectors of that nation, and our nation is going through a time of weakness, and so that would affect also the scholarship and the fuqaha and so on and so forth. So yes, we do not have fuqaha in the caliber of the major ones that you've heard about from the past. And the problem is twofold, but the idea here is that we are all responsible for breaking away from this vicious cycle. What is the vicious cycle? The vicious cycle, and it may have started actually from the time of the middle of the Khilafah al-Abbasiyya. There was this separation between the rulers and the scholars. It was found that it is so hard to fix those rulers. Muslims have experimented with military uprising against the rulers for a good amount of time. Actually, for close to 200 years they've been experimenting, but they failed. Certainly Khilafah al-Abbasiyya is a success against the Umayyad dynasty, so that was the only success in terms of an uprising. But the Khilafah al-Abbasiyya itself turned into a regime that people found the need to resist it after a while. So the Prophet ﷺ says, حَقٌّ عَلَى اللَّهِ أَنَّهُ مَرْتَفَعَ شَيْءٌ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا وَضَعَهُ. It is upon Allah that nothing will rise of this dunya, nothing will rise to higher status in this dunya except Allah, that Allah will put it down. That even applies to Muslim empires and Muslim dynasties. It does apply because those Muslim dynasties are of the dunya or al-akhirah? Of the dunya. These are matters of the dunya. So nothing will go up except that Allah will put it back down. Because that is the dunya, and that is the nature of the dunya, and that is sunnatullah in this dunya. حَقٌّ عَلَى اللَّهِ أَنَّهُ مَرْتَفَعَ شَيْءٌ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا وَضَعَهُ. It is due upon Allah that nothing will rise of this dunya except that He will put it down. So the Umayyads rose to the peak of their strength, and then they started to decline. And the Abbasiyun, the same thing happened. But at any rate, so there were many uprisings, and Hussein radiallahu anhu led one of those uprisings early on against the Umayyad dynasty. And Ibn al-Ash'ath led another uprising during the time of Abu Hanifa against the Abbasiyun, and in the midst there were many, many uprisings. So the Muslims felt that they were sort of broken, particularly the scholars and the students of knowledge. That every time we rebel against the tyranny of the regime, we seem to get defeated. So sort of they gave up on that. And at the same time, they were initially, during the initial period of the Abbasid dynasty, there was this, like some warmth between the scholars and the leaders and so on. This started to vanish by the middle of the Abbasid dynasty, or the end of the first half of the Abbasid dynasty, which is the period of flourishment and so on. The state of the rulers had become such that the noble scholars decided to just separate themselves completely, walk away, leave them, stay away from them as much as possible. And you hear a lot of talks about the evil of association between the scholars and the sultans and so on, which resulted after a while into the gradual decline, because now fiqh is not invoked in resolving the matters of the state. But fiqh is still operative at the level of, individual conflicts, public, etc. But this certainly resulted in some sort of decline of the relevancy of fiqh, particularly to public matters, state matters, communal matters, societal matters. So fiqh was somewhat isolated. And then gradually, the rulers started to feel that the fuqaha, what the fuqaha produce is irrelevant, as is inapplicable. So they decided to depend on their own ijtihad, their own reasoning, away from the realm of fiqh altogether. And eventually that resulted in modern times when the Europeans put together their laws and codified them, standardized them, codified them, particularly French laws and so on. Then the Muslims started to feel that we really ought to take that and use it, because it looks good, standardized, codified, relevant to modern times. And that is when Almani, or secularism, started to spread within the Muslim countries. So who is to blame in this this dissociation between the rulership and scholarship, or the fuqaha and the rulers? And maybe maybe both. Maybe and certainly maybe the initial blame would go to the scholars, to the fuqaha, to the rulers, because the fuqaha found at one point that it's so hard to change the reality, so they decided to dissociate themselves from corruption. But then that eventually led to that complete dissociation, and fiqh became irrelevant to public matters, state matters, and then it started to become irrelevant to the laws in general in modern times. So yet now this is a vicious cycle, because when you don't involve the fuqaha, they will continue to be in ivory towers. What do you expect? I mean, if you don't involve them in the, if fiqh is not invoked to basically judge the reality, fiqh continues to be a theoretical discipline. Theoretical disciplines, and that's the difference between, even they recognize this difference early on, very early on. Like Muhammad ibn Hassan and Abu Yusuf, two scholars, two great fuqaha. But you take Abu Yusuf's opinions in matters pertaining to, state affairs, public matters, judiciary, and so on, because he was a practitioner. He was a judge. He was a chief justice. Muhammad ibn Hassan was more of a theoretical mufti and faqih. So in matters of state affairs and public, matters and judiciary and so on, within the Hanafi school, if there is disagreement between Abu Yusuf and Muhammad ibn Hassan, they favor Abu Yusuf because he was a practitioner, he practiced it. So when you practice, you become more aware of the reality that you're practicing in, and that will help you become more and more relevant. And your decrees, fatwa, edicts become more and more applicable. Okay. So at this point, breaking away from this vicious cycle is to gradually involve the scholars and bring them in the fold of the reality of our modern times when we discuss matters like forensic medicine and how forensic medicine should be incorporated in the Islamic judiciary. Then the scholars would sit down and have this bilateral discussion or multilateral discussion with experts in forensic medicine who would make them aware, because the secular jurists, they are not experts in everything either, but because they practice, they were told that you're in charge and they have to come up with laws that are applicable and relevant. They acquired this knowledge and they became more flexible, etc. Once you invite the fuqaha to the decision-making panel, I think that we will get the lost relevancy and all of that stuff. And the fuqaha are more than ready to do this. So that is how we break away from this vicious cycle of lack of involvement, dissociation, and irrelevancy, because they go hand in glove. If you don't involve me in practical decision making, I would continue to theorize, because you did not involve me in the practical decision making. So I'll continue to theorize, and I will use my theories without testing them on the ground. So Nadine, do you have a question?
I was just wondering if it's also like, when you say it's a sunnah of Allah, that authority and religious, judicial affairs are never really combined. Like we see that the Pope, and then you have King James, and even in so-called modern day Israel, they're not really ruling by the law themselves.
But that's the difference between Islam and other religions, and that Islam has intrinsic ability to basically rule at any time and in any conditions. The shortcoming here is not from the theory or the tenets of the religion as much as it is because of the practitioners, whether it is the leaders of the Muslims or the fuqaha. They are the ones who had issues amongst themselves. But the theory itself is able to come to the table at any time and be relevant and practical and applicable, completely applicable. It is just that the practitioners, the two angles, did not, the leaders and the fuqaha, that they had to dissociate because they did not get along with each other. And the third angle of that triangle, which is the public also, it all starts from the public, because the public produces the jurists and the leaders. They are not imported, they are produced, they come from the public. And then when the conditions of the public are so miserable, you will not expect the conditions of the leaders and the jurists to be, much different. Yes.
So hypothetically speaking, if you were working with a leader, a Muslim leader, and he insists on his haram way, taking from these examples, do you dissociate yourself from him, or do you work around that? What do you do?
That's why nowadays many of the contemporary scholars, they really do not want any more dissociation, because eventually we dissociated ourselves. Dissociation was helpful at the outset, at the conception of the making of fiqh or the compilation of fiqh and hadith and so on, because at this time, the Umayyads had issues, for instance, with Ali radiallahu anhu. You will find in our Sunni traditions, the praise of Ali permeates through our Sunni traditions. It has not been affected in any way, shape, or form by the Umayyad resentment of Ali and his descendants. Do you find resentment in our Sunni tradition? Absolutely not. You find quite the opposite. That is one of the blessings of that dissociation. Became the scholarly body became completely independent of the rulers. So now the rulers are not affecting the scholars, but unfortunately the scholars also are not impacting the rulers. At this point, dissociation is not going to be helpful, from here on. I mean, the dissociation may have helped in the beginning, at the outset, so that no one can ever accuse the legacy, the fiqhi legacy of the Muslims, particularly mainstream Muslims and Sunnis, of having been influenced by the rulers, because they dissociated early on. But nowadays, I think that as long as you can make a difference, stay around and try to make a difference. Once you feel that you cannot make a difference, that's when you walk away. Once you feel that you're too weak, that you're being tempted, that you're afraid that you're going to be tempted, or that you're being tempted, you're not really in it completely for Allah, but you're in it for your personal gains, that's when you walk away. That's when you need to walk away. But if you're in it and you're comfortable that you can handle it, to a great extent, and that you're in this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you do not dissociate. Then you stay around to try to impact them. Even early on, some of the scholars wanted to stay around. Zuhri, he was close to the Umayyads, and he wanted to stay around. He was able to sit down and advise them, because if we all dissociate, and just leave the rulers in their own bubble, and we, stay in our own bubble, it could be quite costly for the Ummah if we all dissociate completely. So you will find someone like Sa'id ibn Musayyib, who was, who had like a lukewarm relationship with the rulers, a little bit tense, not lukewarm, tense relationship with the rulers. You find the Zuhri, and all of those are the greatest tabi'in. Those names are the greatest tabi'in. You find the Zuhri, who was, much warmer towards the rulers, the Umayyads, the Umayyid. And then you find Sa'id ibn Jubayr, who was quite oppositional, against the Umayyads. And all of these are great, great scholars. And all of these, we don't suspect them to have done what they had done for personal gains. But we believe that they did what they felt to be in the best interest of the religion and Islam and so on. So Zuhri, his closeness to the Umayyads did not prevent him from saying the truth. And then when Hisham was asking about al-ifk, and who al-ifk is the great, the great lie. And ifk in this sense is the accusations they made against Aisha radiallahu anha. So Hisham ibn Abdul Malik wanted to say that it was Ali who made those accusations against Aisha. So he said to Zuhri, who man sahib al-ifk, or who is the one that started those accusations? So Zuhri told them, it's Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, it's the chief of the Munafiqeen. So Hisham told them, kadhab, you're lying. So Zuhri stood up and he said, أنا أكذب ولا أبا لأبيك. Do you accuse me of lying? لا أبا لأبيك is, it means it's just like a very offensive, word. So Hisham ibn Abdul Malik was the Khalifa at the time. Zuhri, Zuhri would not. La أبا لأبيك means your father has no father. Something close to it. So it is like, the idea is, despite the warmth of the relationship, it never prevented him from saying the truth and adhering to it. Yes.
Was this during the time were the scholars being tortured, or was it before the scholars started being tortured?
Well, the scholars were not really all tortured at any point in the Umayyad or the Abbasid dynasty. The collectivity of the scholars, maybe the greatest fitna that happened to the scholars was, certainly Al-Harra, the Battle of Harra in Medina is where many scholars were killed, but it was against a particular locality, the people of Al-Medina during this time. But in terms of, an ideological war against the scholars, maybe during the time of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, people refused to say that the Quran is makhluk, the Quran is created. The scholars were tortured, or refused to say that the Quran is created. But torture was focused. It was not just against all the scholars, because there was no Muslim leader that would dare to just torture the scholars. So it is basically focused. So Imam Abu Hanifa was put in jail. But Imam Abu Hanifa was put in jail because he refused to be the judge. Because he was asked to be Chief Justice and he refused. Imam Malik was tortured and so on because of a certain fatwa. Imam Ahmad was tortured because he refused to say the Quran is created. Imam Shafi'i was tortured or arrested in Yemen and taken in handcuffs to Iraq because he was accused of tashayyu. Yet it was not like mass torture against the scholars. It was because of something in particular, like a particular reason. It's not to justify it or to belittle it, but the scholars in their entirety, in their collectivity, no Muslim leader would have ever dared to say, well, I'll torture the scholars. But the scholars were tortured from very early on, from the time of Sa'id ibn Jubayr, from Tabi'in. And Sa'id was not only tortured, he was killed by Hajjaj. So from the time of Tabi'in, there was torture, there was massacre against the scholars.
So this, even though it was just...
And certainly we could go back a little bit earlier, even during the time of the Sahaba. There was torture of the scholars to a great extent. So Abdullah ibn Zubayr is a Sahabi. He was crucified.
This specific torture to a specific individual led the other scholars to be kind of hesitant and short from being involved too much with the government or with the Muslim leaders.
Yeah, you know, hesitant of being involved, the hesitancy of being involved was basically because of resentment of the ways of the leaders, the impious ways of the leaders. That's what made them hesitant. Because if you get involved, then you fear for your deed, you fear for this, you know, your credibility and your deed. Otherwise, if you get involved with the leaders and say what they want, you'll always be okay. It's just, you'll be fine. Since it's very conceptual, yeah, we talked about the flourishing and brilliance, relevancy. And I'll show you just this slide. So this shows, to some extent, you know, this is not from this particular book, but this is from Dr. Abu Amina's book, The Evolution of Fiqh, and the one who made this slide is Ibrahim Hafiz from Minnesota, just to recognize him. So foundation, you know, development of fiqh, the period of foundation from 13 before Hijrah until 10 after Hijrah, that's the time of the Prophet ﷺ himself. Establishment is during the rightly guided Khalifas. The building was during the Umayyad dynasty, which ended about 133 after Hijrah. So the building is from 40, end of the rightly guided Khalifas times, a time to 140, that's about 10 years after the Umayyad dynasty collapsed. Flowering is the Har. This is the time of the four Imams, the time of Sibawayh and Asma'i. This is flowering in every regard, not only in the Sharia sciences, in language, in every regard. That is the first half of the Abbasid dynasty, which was at the time of the Muslim civilization reached its peak during this time. Baghdad was the city in, during that time. From 142 to 348, in consolidation, where there is not much intellectual discourse, there is not much new ijtihad, there is not much progress, there is consolidation. It means that, you know, those great scholars, the four Imams and their contemporaries, left us like a great legacy, a huge legacy, enormous. And then let's preserve it, let's keep it, let's, you know, compile it, let us, you know, explain it, elaborate on it, but that's it, to consolidate what we have. And that led to, you know, stagnation. And now, is there some awakening happening at this point? You know, some people could say that, some people may disagree. All of this will be somewhat subjective, but to a great extent, it is true. There is some degree of subjectivity, but to a great extent it's true. It's true overall. But it does not mean that during this period of stagnation, you do not have some of the, you know, greatest scholars ever. Ibn Hajar, Ibn Taymiyyah, Nawawi, Ibn Qudama, Suyuti. Like, you think in this period that's called stagnation or decline, all of these names will shine through this period of stagnation and decline. So was it really a period of stagnation and decline? It is, because of the overall, despite the presence of such luminaries, overall, to a great extent, it was a period of stagnation and decline, and that is when the rulers started to go their own way and judged by what's called siyasat or siyasa, basically their own resolutions. And that's how we reached where we are now. So basically, we will talk about these phases, inshallah, throughout our discussion of the book. Surely knowing the history of Islamic fiqh allows the researcher to identify the components of such brilliance. Through them, the researcher will be armed with these components whenever he or she ponders over legal verdict passed on contemporary issues. This in return qualifies the compatibility of the Islamic Sharia for every age and place. So he was talking about, if you remember, we were talking a long time ago about that we as the defenders of Islam are most interested in defending the Islam against the accusations of rigidity and incompatibility. And it is important through your study of the history of the Islamic legislation that you recognize basically the causes of flowering and stagnation and so on, so that you could now help with awakening and flowering and relevancy and strength of Islamic fiqh, compatibility with the times. Furthermore, this sheds light on the reasons for weakness and stagnation, so that he or she will avoid them and their causes, and by that deprive the enemies of Islam from the chance to fabricate lies against it. This is the ultimate objective behind studying the history of the Islamic fiqh in our university, seeking to support students and researchers towards advancing Islamic fiqh in an ever-changing world. We ask Allah, the Most High, to guide us all towards what benefits Islam and His Sharia, and may His peace and blessings be upon His Messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family and his companions. I think we should stop because we said that 9:30 would be the end, and now it's 9:40. And next time, inshallah, we'll begin with general goals for studying the curriculum, and we will get into the definition of fiqh and the difference between fiqh and sharia and fiqh and so on. جزاكم الله خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. ومن درى الجميع